A look at the planned sale and what it means for the growth of local participation in Nigeria's oil and gas space. I'm being joined by Dolapo Oni, Energy Research Analyst at EcoBank. Thank you so much, Dolapo, for joining us.
Thank you, Esther.
Now, I'm looking at some of the names, and perhaps you have seen them too, the crop of names or contenders, if you will. Now, do you think that these companies have the capacity to take over assets such as these?
Yes, I think one of the things this process has sort of shown is the fact that the local and indigenous operators in Nigeria have gained experience and have gained the technical know-how to actually take over this kind of assets. And from what we've seen in the Shell divestment, some of the assets that have been taken over by the local operators have actually seen significant improvement in terms of production. So can the local operators actually take these assets and actually unlock the value in these assets? I believe they can. And on the financing side, that's also an aspect that also is supporting this trend. There's a lot of support from the local banks to actually finance the acquisition of these assets.
Now, you believe that the OML, out of the 3 oil blocks, although we know 5 of them are planned to be sold by Chevron, but for now 3 are on the table. Now, you say that the OML 53, which has over 300 million BBLS of the oil and gas reserves, is likely to represent 60% of the bid sum.
Yes, because I think when you look at the 3 assets, OML 52 is mostly a gas asset. OML 53 still has about over 300, in fact, possibly about 397 million barrels of oil reserves. And then you have OML 55, which is still somewhere around 150 million barrels of crude oil reserves. So I think in terms of production also too, you also look at the fact that production capacity on OML 53 is also quite significant. That field can actually gross production up to about some 40,000 barrels per day, which is quite significant when you look at what that means for any of the local operators. So it is going to represent a very significant portion of the bid sum, which we expect to be something within the range of about $500 to about $750 million for the 3 assets, 52, 53, and 55.
Okay, let's talk about funding. Do you think that local banks here in Nigeria would be willing to fund these divestments, or could these companies be looking outside our shores?
In fact, I think one thing we've seen from the Shell divestment is the fact that Nigerian banks are eager to actually fund this sort of acquisitions. If you look at the Shell divestments, which were for about some 8 blocks, the total divestment sum was about $2.8 billion, and about 65% of that was actually debt of about $1.8 billion. And I dare say that Nigerian banks actually funded about 80% of that debt. When you look at this particular divestment by Chevron, you look at the lineup of financiers behind most of the companies that are bidding, and you see that it's mostly Nigerian banks. Nigerian banks could end up funding, something within the range of about 80 to 90% of this particular acquisition.
Now, let's talk about we don't know who the eventual winner will be, but let's talk about the advantages of what could come to this company.
Okay, from acquiring this asset, I think it's quite significant, because once these companies actually acquire these assets and they take over the work of actually developing these fields, the capacity on these fields alone, in our own estimations, we're looking at the capacity of about 100,000 barrels of crude oil per day. And when you look at the companies involved in this particular acquisition that have crossed over to the final stage, I'm not quite sure there's any of them that is really producing up to that level. So, this will be significant. This will be quite transformational for any of these companies.
Okay, well, let's talk about the federal government's trying to encourage more local oil companies in the oil and gas space. We've seen that since 2010, but there have been speculations and, joint or divergent views, if you will, as to the real reason why these international oil companies are divesting. Some say that if they do not sell their smaller assets now, that could be challenging for them going forward.
Well, if you want to talk about the reasons why the IOCs are divesting, I think there are quite a lot of reasons. Of course, on one side, you have the security issues in the Niger Delta where pipelines are constantly being vandalized. And also, there's also the more strategic reason of the fact that there's a lot of potential offshore. Most of the fields onshore are now mature fields, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to actually maximize or optimize production from those fields, or actually produce some sort of commercial quantities that would satisfy the IOCs. So, I mean, some of that is part of the reason why we're seeing this divestment. But for some of the IOCs, it's also a sort of strategic rebalancing of their portfolio to concentrate on areas where there are less risk and possibly higher margins, and also where the potentials are still quite significant to justify exploration spend. And for these IOCs in Nigeria, the offshore region of Nigeria, which is believed to hold something between about 22 billion barrels of Nigeria's crude oil, is actually a region they want to start testing or looking at significantly.
Dalakwa, you've talked about oil theft, pipeline vandalism. Wouldn't that be some of the factors that these local oil companies will have to contend with if they come on board?
Yes, it is, and I mean, we were at the DPR forum yesterday, and that's part of the reasons, part of the issues we talked about. It's still an issue, and it's something that still requires significant attention from the government. The pipeline vandalism is quite high. For some of the junior operators, you're looking at close to 90%, 19% of their production actually lost in the cost of transporting it via the export pipelines due to oil theft and vandalism of the pipeline. So it's quite a significant issue. They are still going to face it. But what some of them have done, which I think is actually helping out, is the fact that they've expanded their community engagement programs. They've made them more robust, engage the communities to actually defend and actually protect those pipelines, engage some of the youths in the communities to actually provide some menial services around the pipeline areas, and this has helped to ensure that